My son zipped my tent shut in the black Alaskan night and breathed into the cold. Meet the Grizzly, Mom. If you've ever loved a child who learned to count your money instead of his blessings, you already know the taste of metal in the mouth that comes with betrayal. Before I tell you how I got back to the motel before he did, hit subscribe, tap the bell, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because what happens next belongs on the evening news. My name is Evelyn Carter of Ballard, Seattle. Widow, 59, grease under my nails from the 2-bay garage I've run since my husband Paul's heart gave out in a Safeway parking lot. On the day this started, rain needled the windows and the smell of motor oil clung to my navy pea coat. Tyler blew through my front door on Queen and Avenue like a storm cell. Hood up. Sneakers squeaking. He didn't ask if I'd eaten. He didn't look at Paul's folded flag over the fireplace. He just said, $5,000. Now. I had a pen in my hand and a stack of invoices, and my chest went tight the way it does when a car throws a rod on I-5 at rush hour. I already transferred your monthly last Friday, I said. Rent doesn't wait, he snapped. Groceries don't wait. Gas doesn't wait. You think $3,000 covers life? I built our life with sockets and knuckles. I hauled transmissions while other moms baked fundraiser cupcakes. After Paul died, I kept the shop open by fixing fleet vans overnight and sleeping on a creeper under a tarp. I paid for Tyler's field trips when he forgot permission slips. I paid for his dental surgery, his senior trip to Santa Cruz, his University of Washington dorm where he learned to network and majored in roommates. You need steady work, I said. He flinched like I'd swung a wrench. Why should I, he said softly, when you're sitting on cash like a dragon? When you run everything like a dictator? He laughed, and it wasn't my boy's laugh. When you die, I'll run those bays better than you ever did. The words hung like carbon monoxide. You don't smell them until your legs won't carry you. He saw my face and bolted. The door slammed so hard Paul's memorial photo rattled on the mantel. In it, Paul holds out a paper tray of clam chowder from Pike Place Market, steam curling into spring air. The frame steadied, but something in me didn't. I tried dishes, then bookshelves, then wiping the counter that didn't need wiping. I pulled an old album and touched a photo of Tyler at 8 in a Mariners jersey, his front teeth gapped, peonies blooming in a Ballard neighbor's yard behind him. I turned a page. His first Honda, the silver Civic I paid for in cash because he said anything used was a bad look. Tuition receipts. Rent transfers. Apologies I had written with money. By Thursday night, I sat in Paul's green armchair and admitted the truth like a confession in St. Anne's. I had raised a boy who could do this math. Love plus guilt plus easy money equals rot. And still, when the phone rang Friday morning and his name lit the screen, hope rose against reason. Hey, Mom, he said in a voice too bright. I've been thinking. I was a jerk. Let me make it up to you. Just you and me. Alaska. Denali. No phones, no shop smells, no bills. Remember when Dad taught me to follow tracks at Mount Rainier? Let's reset. What's the catch? I asked. He chuckled. No catch. My buddies bailed last minute. I've got permits, the whole package. Flights tonight, or they expire. I don't want to waste them. Pressure sales. Urgency when no urgency exists. But he said, Dad, without biting the word in half. He said, reset. Behind my ribs, a tender, stupid thing reached toward him. All right, I heard myself say. Text the details. I packed what I could. Thermal base layers. Paul's old red scarf I keep in a drawer for days the shop feels colder than it is. A silk blouse, because hope dresses up. I slid a folder into my bag, paper I'd signed 3 weeks earlier after a night of rain and fear. A new will. Charity beneficiaries. A scholarship in Paul's name at the vocational school on Aurora Avenue for kids who still want to turn wrenches. I didn't know then that paper would be my bulletproof vest. At Seattle-Tacoma, Tyler bounced on his heels at gate C12, grinning like the boy who used to count delivery trucks on 15th Avenue. Perfect timing, he said. Boarding now. The backpack on his shoulders looked fresh from a display wall, the tags notched off with teeth. On the plane he talked about wilderness content and air that tastes like ice. He checked his phone too much for a man selling disconnection. I told him about Paul's Navy stories I'd heard so often I could say them in my sleep. How he learned to read clouds, to find north by trees, to make stove fuel from fat. You actually know that stuff? Tyler asked, scribbling on an airline napkin. Some of it, I said. Enough to make bad decisions less fatal. Anchorage air hit us like a clean blade. We rented a 4Runner and bought extra rope and bear canisters at a place called Northern Exposure Outfitters where the clerk's eyebrows made mountains when Tyler insisted on the most remote route on the map. The Toklat backcountry, he said to the ranger at check-in. We want the real thing. Ranger Ava Brooks wore hair in a tight braid and spoke like someone who had delivered more than one next of kin notice. That's 30 miles from help, no cell, she said. Mama grizzlies with cubs have been active all week. If you're new to this, start on the Savage River Loop. My father's practically a survival instructor, Tyler said. He taught me everything. He smiled at me like a stage light. I signed the waiver because pride has hands of its own sometimes. Ava showed us a beacon. Hold for 5 seconds and someone comes, she said. If weather lets them. 12 to 18 hours on a good day. She looked at Tyler. You sure? Absolutely, he said. Spruce scraped the windows like fingernails. Snow sat in shaded folds. He parked where the ruts ended, near wooden posts that looked like headstones. We loaded backpacks. His was badly packed and heavy in all the wrong places. Mine was old and ordinary and fit like memory. We hiked until the daylight stretched thin. Wolf prints stitched across a muddy patch. Eagle shadows sliced the clearing. Tyler kept glancing over his shoulder, as if the wilderness might tap him to remind him it was real. We found a flat spot by a slow creek and I did what I have always done. I made a working thing out of a broken place. Food hung 12 feet high. Cooking downwind. Bear spray where I could find it without looking. He fumbled with the tent. Can you? He started, and I showed him knots with names like songs we forgot. We ate noodles out of metal cups. The night pressed in. He asked about my childhood in Yakima, about picking cherries at June dawns, about the blue dress I wore the day Paul proposed under a hanging basket of petunias outside Lowell's at the market. He listened like a son who had come back to me. I'll take first watch, he said. I want to hear what the forest sounds like when it decides you belong. He smiled, and I saw a toddler grinning behind cupcake frosting. I went to my tent and lay down on my side, one arm under my cheek, my boots near the zipper. I listened to him move, to the fire settle, to the creek speak a language older than mother's. Then I slept like a woman who believed in second chances. Before dawn, the cold woke me. Not the kind that sits politely in your bones. The kind that chooses your heart. I reached for my boots and found air. I unzipped the tent. The fire was ash. The food, the beacon, the rifle we had rented at the range in town, gone. Tyler stood by the truck, moving fast, loading like he had practiced. When he saw me, he froze for a beat, then smiled without teeth. What's going on? I asked. Change of plans, he said. Weather. He didn't look at the sky. It was the color of nickel and promise. Ranger said clear for 3 days, I said. He lifted the tailgate. Meet the Grizzly, Mom, he whispered. He climbed in, slammed the door, and backed away. I stepped forward, hands open. Tyler, listen to me. He didn't. The 4Runner turned once, twice, then vanished into trees it should not have known so well. The engine thinned to a thread and snapped. Silence fell, full of breathing I could not hear. Silence without machines is a different species of quiet. It carries teeth. I stood on an empty dirt track, 30 miles from help, my boots in my hands, my breath like smoke. Grief came first. Then discipline. Paul used to say feelings can ride in the truck, but they don't get the wheel. I put my boots on. I made a list in my head. Shelter. Water. Signal. Direction. I patted my coat. Wallet. A small folding knife I keep for opening boxes when brake pads arrive. A St. Christopher medal Paul wore in the Navy that I looped back on my neck the day his heart stopped. No food. No beacon. No gun. The creek whispered, so I found it again and followed its braid downhill, because water walks toward roads and people when it can. I sang out loud because Ava said bears prefer honest notice to nasty surprises. I chose a hymn my mother liked that I've never actually believed. The air took my breath and gave it back thinner and meaner. Tracks found me. Moose. Wolf. A print as wide as my hand that could only be what Tyler wanted me to meet. I clapped. I talked to air. I kept moving because movement was the only prayer I had that didn't ask permission. Time shucked its shell. The light shifted. My knees argued like old Union guys at a bar. I stopped at a fallen spruce and used my knife to cut a branch into a green bough and waved it like a flag whenever the creek dropped into a ravine and I had to climb around. I snapped twigs as I walked to leave a breadcrumb trail I hoped I'd never need. Then I heard it. Faint and wrong in all the right ways. Engines. Not one. Several. Not a truck. Smaller. Closer. I turned toward the sound and pushed through willow and alder until a clearing opened like a mouth and 4 ATVs idled under a sky the color of a steel sink. The lead rider removed a helmet and revealed a woman with weather-burned cheeks and the kind of eyes that measure rather than judge. "You're a long way from where you're supposed to be," she said. "I'm Ava Brooks. Off shift." "My son left me," I said. "Took the gear. Took the truck." Saying it out loud made the world adjust itself by an inch. The other riders went still. A man in a camo jacket swore softly. A teenager with freckles put a water bottle in my hand and said, "Sip." I did. It felt like forgiveness. Ava listened the way good mechanics listen to engines. "How long?" 4 hours. Maybe 5. Time got elastic. She clicked her tongue once, thinking. "There's a ranger cut through. We'll get you back in 90 minutes if a tree didn't fall across it. He won't expect you before night. Do you want me to call troopers now, or do you want to do something first?" I pictured the motel log walls, the thin bedspread, Paul's red scarf on the chair like a witness. I pictured Tyler practicing tears. "I want him to see me," I said. "And I want a record." Ava nodded like a pivot she'd made before. "You'll have both." She put me on the back of her ATV. The others fanned out. We cut along a ribbon of trail so narrow alder branches slapped my thighs. Twice we stopped to haul blown-down trunks by hand. Once we ran a creek so cold it sang. We burst out onto pavement like surfacing from a lake. Denali Lodge Motel rose ahead, its carved bear sign ridiculous and perfect. We scanned the lot. The forerunner was gone. Ava's mouth ticked. "You've got time to set the table." She fished a card from her pocket and scribbled a personal number. "I'm off the clock, but not the job. I'll bring a camera. Audio too. Alaska juries don't like wilderness stunts. They understand what it costs." In the room, I washed my face and watched the sink water go brown at the edges with spruce dust. I set Paul's scarf across the chair back. I took the folder from my bag and spread the wool across the little desk next to the lamp with the moose silhouette shade. I called my attorney in Seattle. We spoke 4 sentences. Tomorrow morning the filings would be complete. Then I called the front desk and paid cash for the room next door. Ava arrived with a small hard case and a look that said she'd stopped worse things than storms. We threaded a microphone under the bedspread edge and hid a camera in the fake log picture frame that held a watercolor of a very cheerful salmon. She checked levels. She checked sight lines. "If you change your mind, we call troopers at once," she said. "I won't," I said. "But if I say the word raincoat, that means it's time." Night sank into the parking lot and kept going. Snow flurries wrote short sentences we couldn't read. I sat in the straight-backed chair that faced the door and practiced breathing. I thought of Tyler at 3 with a toy tow truck, dragging it up the stair carpet one step at a time, determined to bring it to bed. I thought of Tyler at 13 asking for the password to the shop's Wi-Fi so he could upload a project and discovering his project was a gambling app. I thought of Tyler at 28 asking for $5,000 with a voice that wanted tribute, not help. Headlights swept across the bare carving. The rental's engine gave itself away. The lock turned. The door opened. Tyler stepped in with his face arranged, then saw me and forgot to keep the mask on. Shock cracked across him. Fear chased it. Incredulity tried to cover both. "Mom," he said hoarsely. "How did you?" "I walked," I said. "Then I rode." He closed the door behind him as if closing could rewind. His gaze snagged on the papers on the desk. "What's all that?" "What you think you deserve," I said, "and what the world thinks instead." I stood. I felt very tired and very awake, the way you feel the hour before dawn when the coffee finally hits bone. "You plan to leave me to die for money." His mouth opened. "You have no proof," he said, and I saw him realize as the sentence left that it was a confession pretending not to be. "I have a ranger who found me," I said. "I have the route you chose when beginners take loops. I had your phone calls from gas station parking lots on the way up and the receipt time stamped in your glove box. I have the way you smiled when you said no turning back now. And I have you, right now, in a room you expected to be empty." He swallowed. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said. "You're being criminal." I lifted the folder. 3 weeks ago, after you told me I was a dictator and you'd run my base better when I was gone, I changed my will. Everything goes to a vocational scholarship at North Seattle College in your father's name, to a veterans tool fund, and to wildlife conservation in a state where you use the wild as your weapon. You inherit nothing. Not the house on 14th. Not the shop. Not the accounts. Not the ceramic mug with a crack that was your dad's favorite. You can't, he whispered. I already did. His face broke in a way that would have wrecked me if I hadn't walked out of a trap he built. He stepped toward me with hands I once taught to tie shoes. Please, he said. I was desperate. Rent. Alicia left. The app. You know I've tried. I didn't mean. You meant to leave me to bears, I said. You meant to let weather finish what your courage wouldn't start. You meant to drive home and call the police with tears you practiced on the highway. He stared. I watched the boy I raised recede like a tide pulled by a black moon. He looked small in the motel lamplight. He looked like a man who had rehearsed a story and didn't like the script he found. What now? He asked. Now, I said, I call the troopers. And I sleep. He reached for the paper. I said, don't, and he stopped. I walked past him and opened the door. Cold air walked in and sat down. Somewhere next door, a barely audible click meant the camera wrote history to a memory card. Mom, he said, and the word was a question no answer could fix. Raincoat, I said toward the wall. The connecting door opened. Ava stepped in, badge clipped to her belt, eyes on Tyler. He took a step back like the floor had shifted. It had. The earth sometimes tips under your feet not because it wants to, but because you insisted. Detective Sarah Martinez at the Anchorage Police Department had a way of asking questions that made truth feel like the only temperature in the room. She spread the motel audio file, the video, the ranger log, and my statement across a metal table that did not care about anyone's feelings. Tyler sat in holding down the hall. Through a pane of reinforced glass, I watched him staring at his shoes, wrists cuffed, hair flattened by a long night he hadn't planned for. "Ms. Carter," Martinez said, "this is as clear a wilderness abandonment as I've seen. Attempted murder in the first degree. Reckless endangerment. Fraud tied to inheritance. The DA will file by noon." I nodded because my voice wasn't steady enough yet to carry what I meant. Ava stood beside me, arms folded, a silent wilderness where I could set down a piece of this weight. "What's the likely sentence?" I asked when my throat learned English again. 15 to 25 depending on the plea, Martinez said. Alaska juries take this personally. It's their backyard. She glanced toward the glass. "Do you want to see him?" "No," the word surprised me with how ready it was. "The boy I loved is not in that room." We finished the paperwork. I signed forms with the same hand I used to write estimates and order gaskets. The ordinary felt obscene and comforting at the same time. Outside the precinct, the morning was a clean sheet. The Chugach Mountains stood up like a backbone. Ava offered me a ride back to the lodge. I asked her to take me to a coffee shop instead. We chose one with windows and cinnamon buns as big as hubcaps. I could taste again. "What happens now?" she asked gently. "I go home," I said. "I see my lawyer. I file what needs filing. I change the shop locks. I tell the parts counter at Napa not to release to Tyler on my account. I set the scholarship paperwork on a path no one but a judge can detour. Then I open the bay doors Monday at 8 because Betty's Subaru still needs brakes." "And your son?" she asked. "My son made choices," I said. "I'll make mine." I sipped coffee. It was hot enough to sting. Paul used to say the hardest part of tightening a bolt is knowing when to stop turning so you don't strip the threads. I turned too long with Tyler. Ava nodded like she knew tools, and she did. "You didn't cause his hands," she said. "You just gave him a bench." I didn't cry then. I cried later in the motel bathroom where the fan hid the sound and the towels were thin and honest. When I was empty enough to hear my own breathing, I packed. At the front desk, the woman in the flannel shirt slid a tissue across the counter without looking at me because sometimes kindness needs plausible deniability. She said, "My cousin did 6 years because a man left her brother in a whiteout. I'm glad you're standing here," and gave me a discount I didn't ask for. Back in Seattle the sky was doing its usual gray arithmetic. The shop smelled like brake cleaner and coffee. Ray, my tech with forearms the size of hams and opinions to match, gave me a once-over like I was a car fresh off a tow. "Boss," he said, "you look like Alaska tried you and found you guilty." "It did," I said, and I appealed. We worked. Calipers. A timing belt that had skipped a tooth and made a civic sound like it planned to explode. A mother with a screaming toddler who apologized to the whole world and left with new wipers on her bill because sometimes mercy is rubber on glass. Normal held. I visited my attorney that afternoon. We signed the final version of the will. We set up the Carter Tool Fund for veterans at a bank with too much glass in its lobby. We established the Paul Carter Scholarship for students of the trades with a photo of Paul holding that clam chowder, and I picked a frame that didn't pretend not to be from a craft store because sincerity shows up where it can. 3 days later a letter arrived from the Anchorage Correctional Complex postmarked with a stamp that looked like a bird you only see if you go where maps run out. 5 pages. Tyler's handwriting. Sorry like water. Explanations stacked like Jenga blocks. Alicia's name like a magic word he wanted me to say out loud to make the trick work. He promised to be different if the will changed back, if the charges vanished, if I remembered how we were before money made everything complicated. I fed the letter to the shredder in my office. It whirred and gave me strips. I felt light enough to stand taller by an inch. Then I felt nothing at all, and that was better than the kind of something that had been trying to live in my chest for years. The DA called a week later. Tyler took a deal that admitted what he had done and salvaged the bottom of the range. 20 years. Eligible for parole after 15. Courtroom dates followed. Statements. A victim impact paragraph I wrote, wadded, rewrote, and then finally kept simple. He tried to kill me. I lived. I will use my years and my money to repair what I can that is not him. The internet did what the internet does. Local news ran a segment with a blurred version of my face that didn't fool my neighbors. Emails came from women in Tacoma and men in Fairbanks and one mechanic named Joe in Wichita who said, "My boy stole my oxy torch and pawned it. I kept buying him tools. He kept selling my love. Your story hurt and helped." I answered some. I didn't answer most. You can only turn the wrench you're holding. On a Sunday, I put on the silk blouse I'd packed for Hope and the red scarf because it was cold, and I walked to St. Anne's even though belief hasn't lived in me since Paul died. I lit a candle anyway. For me. For Tyler as a boy with a toy tow truck. For the women who lift engines and break cycles. For the men who learn to love their sons without bribery. I let the candle's little bravery be enough. Ava texted a photo that afternoon from a ridge outside Denali. Sky. Snow. A set of tracks veering away from a trail because someone sang when they should. Beneath the photo she wrote, "Come back when you want the right reasons." I saved it to my phone and changed her contact name to what she had become, Anchor. At the shop I hung a small sign by the coffee pot where customers can see it but it isn't shouting. It says, "We fix cars. We try to fix people only when they ask." Ray added, "And we don't give out Wi-Fi passwords to anyone named Tyler," and I told him he was fired and then gave him a raise. Spring found Seattle like it always does, with pink blossoms on streets that don't deserve them. I bought peonies at the farmer's market because they remind me that beauty is just hard work hiding in petals. I took the bus home because the bus driver smiled like she knew where every person on that route was going and why. In my living room, Paul's folded flag caught a slice of afternoon light. I stood in that light for a long time. When the scholarship sent its first acceptance letter, I cried again, the good kind that clears the salt out of your eyes. The student's name was Mateo. He works nights. He likes engines. He wrote, "Thank you for believing in people like me." I wrote back, "I believe because I watched a man build a life with a socket set." The DA's office asked if I wanted to give a statement at Tyler's sentencing. I said I had already said what mattered. Then I asked if I could send the judge a photocopy of a vocational school receipt from a decade ago. It was one I paid when Tyler decided welding fumes gave him headaches and dropped out after 2 weeks. The clerk said, "You can," and I did, and I wrote on it, "My problem was never writing checks. It was writing checks that erased lessons." Then I stopped looking backward. There were head gaskets to torque. A caller who said his car made a womp 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 at 30 and I said that's a wheel bearing and he said how can you tell and I said practice. There were girls who stood in the doorway and watched me lift an alternator like it weighed feelings and smiled like mirrors had lied to them their whole lives about what their arms are for. Sometimes late at night I hear the zipper at the edge of my sleep and for a breath I'm back in a tent that isn't mine. Then the house settles and the dog next door barks at a raccoon and I remember where I am, in a life I rebuilt, with my name on the deed, my hands on the work, and a future that belongs to the people I choose. You want the part where the villain pays. I did too. But the thing about justice is that it rarely sounds like a movie trailer when it finally arrives. It clicks like a torque wrench finding the right pound feet. It's ordinary. It's precise. It holds. We were in a courtroom with bad fluorescent lights and a seal on the wall that made me think of old coins. The judge read the plea. Tyler said guilty in a voice that wasn't boy or man but a person at the bottom of a well hearing his own echo. I didn't look at him. I looked at the paper in front of me that said what he did was a felony and that Alaska recognized the wilderness as a weapon when a human chooses to use it that way. The prosecutor spoke about distances and temperatures and the physiology of exposure. She held up a topo map. She pointed to where phone coverage died. She said my name like it meant a case file and a person, both. The defense attorney said Tyler had addiction, that he felt desperate, that I was controlling, that Tyler believed money was love because money was how I expressed it. I agreed with him in my head about that last part, but agreement didn't change the shape of Tyler's acts. When it was my turn, I told the truth in the smallest words I could. My son left me to die for money. He planned it. He smiled while he planned it. I will not spend the rest of my life dying in small pieces to make sense of that. I will live instead. I sat down. My knees shook, but they were mine. The judge gave the numbers. 20 years. A stack of conditions that sounded like a parts list for the soul. Tyler didn't cry. Neither did I. A crying would have implied a world where this was not inevitable once we both chose our roads. The bailiff led him away. The door clicked. The courtroom exhaled. Ava squeezed my shoulder as we stood. Her hand was warm and solid. Anchor. Outside we ate street tacos from a truck because sorrow asks for salt and fat. We didn't say much. She asked me if I'd ever go back into the backcountry. I said yes. She said she'd take me to Savage River when the blueberries ripened. I said I'd bring a thermos and a story that didn't turn into a bruise halfway through. Back in Seattle, the shop had a rhythm again. Ray hummed 80s songs off-key. The radio said rain on Wednesday and sun on Friday, and both were true. A kid named Lila came by with a resume printed on pink paper. She wore steel-toe boots and a nervous smile. I handed her a ratchet and pointed to an alternator and said, "Loosen. Then listen." She did, and she did. At night, sometimes, I open the folder with the scholarship letters and read until the resentment in my chest turns to something workable, the way rust becomes a thread if you take your time and use penetrating oil. Mateo sent a photo of himself holding a certificate that said he passed electrical with an A. He wore a shirt with grease on it like a flag you earn, not buy. People ask if I blame myself. I say I blame the part of me that tried to do love with money when time and boundaries were the only currency that mattered. I say I forgive that part because she was tired and grieving and trying to keep a shop and a child alive at the same time. I say I don't forgive what Tyler did because forgiveness without repentance is just abdication dressed as sainthood. Then I hand them their keys and tell them to come back in 5,000 miles. One evening I walked down to the water where the ferries breathe in and out and watched a family feed fries to gulls. The mother wore a yellow raincoat that made the gray look intentional. The boy leaned too far over the railing and the father snagged the back of his hoodie without looking, the way people do when care is muscle memory. I let myself watch the tenderness and didn't turn away from my own ache. A gull screamed. A ferry horn answered. Life is loud when you decide to stay in it. I got a message from the DA that Tyler had asked if I would visit. I sat with that for a week. I made a pro-con list like a person who believes lists can coax the heart into reasons. Then I went. The room smelled like disinfectant and old air. Tyler looked older around the edges, as if time had sanded him. He said Mom, and it was a lowercase word. I don't need your apology, I said before he began. And I won't change the will. He nodded like he had rehearsed 100 other lines and ended up here instead. I wanted to see if you were real, he said. If I had invented you to make this easier. I'm real, I said. And hard. And still yours in a way that prison can't catalog. We sat for 30 minutes and talked about nothing that matters to anyone but people related by blood and harm. When I left, I didn't feel lighter or heavier. I felt exact. On the sidewalk outside the gate, a dandelion pushed through a crack that city planners missed. I stepped around it because stubborn deserves space. Summer ran its course. I worked. I slept. I laughed at a YouTube video of a raccoon stealing a donut from a police cruiser someone sent me because joy arrives in ridiculous envelopes. When Ava texted that the blueberries were ripe, I closed early. We drove out past where the name's Thin, parked, and walked. The air tasted like cold metal and sugar. She showed me which berries were ready and which lied with a blue sheen over unripe green. We filled 2 plastic containers and our mouths. At a clearing she set the thermos on a rock, and we watched a cloud lose interest in being a threat. We didn't talk about Tyler. We talked about torque specs and why some people buy trucks they never scratch. We talked about the first snow and the last flowers. We watched a fox pretend it didn't see us while seeing us completely. When we turned back, the sun hung low and indifferent. The woods made their own breathing. Driving home, I realized that what went viral about my story was never the Grizzly line or the courtroom or the ex-ranger with a camera. It was the ordinary math of a woman refusing to be subtracted. People watched because they needed proof that endings can be edited by the living. They shared because it felt like a socket set landing in the right drawer. Order from noise. Future from wreckage. If you're still here, if you've stayed through the quiet parts and the parts where my voice shook, you know why I'm telling this. Not for Tyler. For you. For the part of you that thinks love requires losing yourself. It doesn't. You can love and live. You can say no and still be someone's mother. You can change your will and your mind and the way your hands hold out help. I unlocked the shop door the next morning and flipped the lights. The bays gleamed like patience. A delivery guy rolled in a cart of parts and whistled. The day was waiting. I washed my hands and got to it. The first bad thing that happened after court was small and mean. Someone poured sugar into a customer's gas tank at midnight and spray-painted thief on my bay door in red that bled into the concrete like shame. Ray found it before I did. He tried to stand in front of the door like his shoulders could block the word. I told him to move. I took a scraper and a bucket and did the work because there is a kind of power in washing off what someone else tried to stick to you. By lunch a man I did not know leaned in my office doorway and looked around like a tourist who came for a sight he had only seen on the news. He wore a leather jacket in weather that did not ask for it and rings that caught the light like knives. He smiled like a barbed hook. He said he was a friend of Tyler's. He said Tyler had business arrangements that needed attention. He asked if I wanted my shop to stay pretty. He said accidents happen. I stood up and walked him out without raising my voice. I locked the door behind him and wrote down his plate number. I saw his eyes in the glass for a second after he turned away. Calm eyes. This was not a boy. This was a man who thought fear was a tool he could rent out by the hour. I sent the plate to the detective in Anchorage and to a sergeant a neighbor knows at Seattle PD. I installed a camera over the bay doors that afternoon. I added motion lights that come on like daylight when a moth flutters wrong. I slept with Paul's red scarf across my chest like a flag I did not wish to surrender. 2 nights later I woke to the crack of glass. I was in the truck and down the hill in 2 minutes. The front window was a spider web with one leg missing. A brick lay on the floor with a note rubber banded to it. Pay what Tyler owed or this place goes cold. I stood in the broken glass with my boots grinding it smaller and smaller until it looked like snow. I called 911. I called Ray. He arrived with plywood and a drill and a face that said try me. We worked in silence until the hole was a patch and the patch was tight. When the cameras loaded to the cloud I watched the footage. The man in the leather jacket stepped into the frame like he owned it. He looked straight at the lens and smiled again. He did not care. He was telling me his name without words. Jax. The detective in Anchorage called that afternoon. She had found whispers of him in a report about out-of-state poachers in Denali. Not charged. Never quite in the photo. A man in shadows who taught other men how to walk into the wild and not leave prints. I went to a diner on Aurora where the coffee tastes like honesty and met Alicia because she had texted from a number I did not know saying we needed to talk about Tyler. She arrived late and shaky and ordered waffles she did not eat. She told me Tyler had borrowed money from a man who liked to collect in pain. She said the camping trip was not Tyler's idea. Jax sold it to him. Jax said no body, no case. Jax had a shortcut out of the park and a friend who could make a rental agreement go missing. Alicia cried into a paper napkin and asked for rent. I gave her a card for a women's shelter and enough cash for a 2-night motel because I am not cruel but I am done funding my own undoing. I asked for a recording. She slid me her phone across the cheap Formica. A voice note with Tyler panicked and a second voice calm and cold. Jax told him to smile more. Jax told him bears do the rest. I took the file to the DA. I sent a copy to Ava. I backed it up on a drive and put the drive in a cracker box on the top shelf behind a row of dusty manuals. I printed a transcript and slid it under my mattress like a kid hiding a diary. I went home before dark and checked the locks twice. I slept in the blue silk blouse because sometimes armor looks like softness when you're tired of looking hard. The next move was mine. I left a note on my own bay door. Payment ready. Midnight. No police. Back alley. I told Ray to go home and then parked 2 blocks away with a thermos and a camera I could trigger from my phone. I crouched behind the dumpster and waited. The night smelled like wet cardboard and fried food. A car rolled slow down the alley and stopped where I wanted it. Jax got out and looked at the note and smiled for the camera again. He walked to the door and pressed his palm to the glass as if greeting an aquarium fish. I stepped out and said his name. His eyes flicked to the shadows where I was not hiding anyone. He was smart. He kept his hands in sight. He said good evening like a man arriving at a party. I told him there would be no money. I told him there would be a file. I told him it had voices he should not want a judge to hear. He laughed the way men laugh when they think any woman is bluffing. Then he stopped when my phone lit up with a still frame of him smiling into my camera. I said I did not call police because I wanted him to choose. Walk away now and nothing breaks tonight. Come back and everything does. He leaned in like a man smelling a flower he plans to crush. He said the wild always takes what it wants. He said Seattle was not Alaska. He said he would be back with fire. Then he lifted his jacket like a stage reveal and showed me a lighter that looked like a toy and felt like a sentence. He left in the same slow way he arrived. I let him. I called the sergeant with the plate and the time and the video. I called Ava and left a message that I was fine and that the wilderness does not always have trees. I went home and lay awake until the windows went gray. At dawn, Ray sent a photo of the bay door with the red word gone. He had painted over it before he made coffee. He wrote "We fight" and added a crooked heart because even tough men draw like children when they mean it. I put on my pea coat and went to work. I kept the thermos near my hand. I put the lighter from the evidence bag on the desk where I could see it and remember what I was up against and who I had decided to be. The fire came on a Wednesday when the weather map said drizzle and the day said try again. I smelled it first. Not the sweet chemical of brake cleaner. Not the hot toast of a belt running wrong. Fire that wants to be a story has a different voice. I ran to the back and saw flames licking up a stack of oily rags someone had kicked near the compressor like a fuse left as a gift. Heat rolled across my face like anger. I grabbed the big extinguisher by the bay and pulled the pin and pressed the lever and aimed low the way Paul taught me on a summer day we hoped to never need that knowledge. White cloud. Hiss. The fire coughed and died mad. Ray called 911 while I dragged the rag bin into the rain. The crew arrived fast, boots heavy and calm, checked the walls and ceiling, checked my extinguisher gauge, complimented me on not making a mess I did not need to clean. The captain looked at the kick trail in the soot and raised an eyebrow. He did not say Jax. He did not have to. He left me a card with a direct number and told me to call if night felt loud. By noon a florist delivered peonies in a jar with a note that had no signature. The jar smelled like June in Ballard. The card said stay open. I did. Customers came because cars do not care about your personal life. A woman brought a Subaru that made a sound like a bag of marbles. A delivery guy dropped a box of rotors and sang a line from a song that made Ray laugh until he leaned on a fender to keep from falling. In the afternoon Alicia came back with eyes rimmed in red and asked if the shelter would keep her name off things. I said yes. She said Jax had called her 4 times and then stopped calling, which was worse because silence means planning. She gave me another recording she had not meant to make a week earlier. Jax telling Tyler the route out. Jax telling him to take the Ranger Trail because no one checks service roads when tourists get stupid. I send it to the DA. I send it to Ava. I put a copy on a drive and stuck it behind the coffee can labeled decaf because no one in my shop touches that on purpose. At closing I checked the cameras and saw movement in the alley. Not Jack's. 2 boys who looked like they still slept in their mother's houses and borrowed their swagger from videos. They tried my door. They tried my windows. They tried to scratch a word that would not stick this time. I hit the intercom and said go home the way mothers say it on porches. They ran like kids who were not yet lost to men like Jack's. That night I parked around the corner again and waited. Jack's came at 1:40 in a car that did not match his jacket. He stepped out with a small gas can and the lighter I already knew would be in his pocket. I came out of the shadows before he reached the door and said his name. He did not flinch. He set the can down. He smiled. He asked if I liked peonies. He said they make nice funeral flowers when out of season. He picked up the can again. I pressed the button on my phone. Every motion light came on at once. The alley turned white as noon. Sprinklers above the bay door thumped to life and threw water down like a street fight finished by a city. Jack stood in a straight rain and looked at me, then at the dark box I had mounted that morning. Sound. Camera. There is a way a smart man recalculates without showing it. He did that. He set the can down again. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. He said see you soon and left walking instead of running, and that was the part that chilled me more than the water. The sergeant texted an hour later. A patrol unit picked him up 2 blocks away on a noise complaint that became a warrant check that stuck long enough to hold him until morning. He would not stay in a cage for long. Men like him are made of slip. But the pause was enough. The DA filed charges that tied him to a conspiracy with my son. The detective in Anchorage added the Denali thread. The whole thing began to look like a net that could hold weight. News trucks came because news follows fire and mothers with tools. I gave one interview on the condition they show the scholarship link at the bottom of the screen. I said the wild does not always wear fur. I said I was tired of men using distance as a weapon. I said the shop opens at 8 and closes when the job is done. People sent emails and money to the scholarship in amounts that made me believe in small goodness. A girl in Spokane mailed $10 in quarters she had rolled herself with a note that said I want to be you. I wrote back you will be better. Jax posted bond and came to watch me work from across the street with his hands in his pockets like a man out for a walk. He did not cross. He did not speak. He wanted me to know he could breathe my air. I turned up the radio. I moved my body like a woman who owns her space. I smiled at customers and did not look at him. He left 20 minutes later because boredom is a weapon too. A week later the DA called. A court date was set. Conspiracy. Attempted arson. A list of smaller things that add up when you stack them. I would testify about the alley. Alicia would testify about the phone calls and the plan. Ava would speak to service roads and how men who know them hide in maps. The prosecutor said be ready to be called a liar on cross. I said I turned rusted bolts for a living and that a man with a tie would not be the hardest thing my hands had done. That night I dreamed of the creek again. Not the sound. The look when a branch falls and water parts around it without asking permission. I woke with the taste of iron in my mouth and knew the next part needed to be mine. I called Jax from a number he would not recognize and told him he was right about one thing. Money once made me weak. Meet me where the ferries breathe in and out. Bring no one. He asked if he should wear a suit. I said wear whatever you plan to be buried in. Then I hung up and called the sergeant and the DA and a friend who runs a tow truck and told them where to park. Waterfront air has a salt that gets into your head and scrubs it clean. I stood by a bench with my pea coat buttoned and Paul's scarf tucked up high and watched the ferry load cars like a steady heartbeat. Jax arrived alone because pride likes its own reflection. He wore the same jacket and a smile tuned 2 clicks too bright. He stood close enough to smell like a bar where someone lost a bet. You came, he said. You always come when a man whistles. You used the wrong verb, I said. I called you. He looked past me at the lot and at the dark shape of a tow truck 3 spaces down and at the sedan across the street with 2 men in it pretending to be bored. He knew. He measured. He decided to perform anyway. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and held it up. A copy of my old will. He had made it look like leverage. He said, "Remember when love looked like this?" I laughed. I could not help it. I told him paper is only power when the ink is wet and that mine had dried weeks ago. He stuffed the copy back like a magician hiding a scarf. He said the wild likes a clean stage. He said we should go for a drive somewhere quiet. He took a step toward his car. I said no. I said I wanted a talk where the city could hear me if I needed it to. He cocked his head and waited like a dog who knows a trick is coming. I told him I knew about the cut-through trail. I told him I knew about the call from the gas station where Tyler hunched and whispered and lied about weather. I told him I knew Jax had walked those service roads at night until they were his and that he sold that knowledge to angry boys with soft hands. He smiled like a teacher hearing a student finally say the right words. He said, "You have a tongue sharp enough to cut yourself." He said I should be grateful he did not finish the job in the alley with Flame because then I would be ash and not a show. He said a jury would not like a mother who set a trap on a bay door. He said the scholarship was a nice touch and that even wolves enjoy watching sheep donate their wool. I took a breath and let the fairy horn push my words across the space. I said we recorded this. I said every sentence he had landed on my feet was now walking itself into a courtroom whether he wanted it to or not. I said he had a choice. Make more words or make a run. He glanced toward the 2 men in the sedan and then back at me as if calculating a lesson he was not sure he wanted to teach. He chose to move. He turned on his heel and headed for his car and found the tow truck already in motion because my friend behind the wheel had been waiting for the tell. The hook snagged his rear axle with a clank that sounded like a door closing. Jack spun and reached for something under his jacket and found a wall of 2 calm officers where empty air had been a moment before. He froze. His hands rose. The lighter fell and bounced once. The fairy horn sounded again, longer this time, like a line drawn across a page. They cuffed him without theater. The sergeant read a list that was more practical than dramatic. Attempted arson. Conspiracy. Witness intimidation. A separate warrant out of Alaska for the scheme he had built in another man's head. Jax watched me while the words stacked. He did not speak. I watched him like a mechanic listens to an engine he will never touch again. Court for him did not sing. It plodded like a truck in low gear up a long hill. Alicia took the stand and did not cry. She said what she knew and did not add what she wished were true. The judge listened like a person who has heard every lie and still waits for the one he has not. Ava spoke by video from a room with a map behind her and said service roads are not magic and a plan is still a plan when it uses trees. The jury wrote on pads and blinked and lifted their chins at the parts that mattered. Jax tried charm that had always purchased fear for him at a discount. It failed. He tried silence. It failed too. The DA laid the phone audio down like a long crescent wrench. First the call from the gas station. Then the call where Jax coached his student. Then the waterfront where he offered me a drive. The room heard the shape of a man who sells harm with a low voice and a neat plan. When the verdict came it did not shout. Guilty. The word fit. The judge added years to the calendar of consequence. They led Jax away and I did not feel triumph so much as repair. I walked out into a rain that did not sting. The peonies on my kitchen table opened that afternoon as if they did not know this is not their season. Maybe they did not care. Maybe bloom is a choice sometimes. Work did not care either. A man with 3 kids in car seats needed a brake job by Friday or he would have to ride the bus with strollers and his week would break. We got it done. Lila installed pads with hands that had learned steadiness, not speed. Ray told a joke about a priest and a spark plug that landed wrong and then right. The shop radio gave me a weather report that promised sun and delivered drizzle and I laughed at that too. At night I sat with the scholarship letters and wrote notes to the students in plain talk. Use your torque wrench. Read the manual but also listen. Ask for help. Do not steal. Do not sell your future to men who smell like bad coffee and easy answers. Love your people with time, not money. I sealed each envelope with a piece of tape and a breath that did not shake. Tyler wrote again from prison. He said he heard about Jax. He said he was sorry that another man had hurt me. He said he had been clean for 60 days in a program that took away his choices and gave him one he had not tried yet. He asked if I would visit again. I did not answer for a week. Then I said yes, because sometimes the only way to teach yourself you are not made of salt is to walk back into a room and not dissolve. Prison visiting rooms look the same no matter the city. Chairs that make sure no one gets too comfortable. Vending machines that sell sandwiches wrapped in plastic like secrets. A clock that does not care about feelings. Tyler walked in and sat down and put his hands where rules say hands should go. He looked up. His face had lines it did not earn yet. He said Mom, and it did not sound like a trick. I told him about the waterfront and the tow truck and the ferry horn. He closed his eyes like a man hearing a song he wishes he had been the one to write. He said he had not thought Jax would fall. He said he had not thought about much past the moment I disappeared behind trees. He said sorry like a word you take apart and put back together until it means something again. I did not give him absolution. I gave him a list he could hold. Do the program. Finish every class. Learn a trade that builds rather than takes. Write to the court and ask for a placement in a work detail that fixes things broken by storms. Stop writing to me about money. Start writing to me about days where you did not lie once. He nodded like a man who wants a set of rules because rules are in English and hunger speaks without words. On the bus back I watched a boy give his seat to a woman who looked like she held the world an inch from dropping. I watched a man hold his hand out for the driver's step and steady himself without swearing. People are small and good all day long in ways no one records. That is the real viral story. Quiet decency. But quiet does not raise money. Quiet does not always save you in a forest. Quiet saves you every time you stand at a sink and decide to clean the cup you did not dirty. I held that thought like a wrench. The scholarship dinner came fast because the committee wanted to show faces for donors and I wanted to feed kids who had never eaten in a room with linens that did not feel like a dare. We rented a hall near the Ballard Locks and set peonies on every table because I am stubborn. Mateo spoke into a mic that squeaked and told 100 strangers that he had never believed anyone would put his name on a certificate and that now he believes in everything. Lila stood in the back with Ray and clapped so hard her hands went red. I raised a glass of iced tea and said to work and to hands and to repair. People cried without hiding it. People took out wallets without being told. When I got home there was a package on my stoop. No note. Just a small box taped too carefully. I did not bring it inside. I called the sergeant. He came and opened it with a stick like a man who has done this before. Inside was a photo of my house taken from across the street at twilight when windows make your life look warm and a single match in a plastic case. No fingerprints because Jax was not a stupid man even when he was a caged one. The sergeant bagged it and told me to sleep at a friend's place for a few nights. I slept on Ray's couch with his old hound snoring like a truck downshifting in a canyon and woke to coffee that tasted like a truce. Court finished for Jax without more theater. The judge gave him a number that means years not months. The papers called him a backcountry guide, which made me laugh in a way that surprised me because it was better than crying. He guided fear. He guided greed. He guided boys into becoming men who thought wolves would do their laundry for them. Now he will learn to make beds in a place where beds are made neat or you have a problem. I took the peonies from the scholarship dinner and hung them upside down in my shop office to dry because some things are more beautiful when they die with purpose. I hung the card that said stay open above my desk. I put the lighter from the alley in a drawer and stopped looking at it every day. I let space build where obsession had been living rent-free. There is no soft bow here. Tyler still wakes me in the dark sometimes when my brain runs old footage. I still check the locks twice and then a third time when wind knocks the maple branch against the window just wrong. I still walk past the tent aisle at the outdoor store and have to put my hands in my pockets to keep from touching zippers. Healing is not a straight road. It is a switchback where every turn looks like the last until suddenly the view changes and you realize you have climbed. The shop hums. The scholarship list grows. Lila changed her own oil at home and sent me a photo of her hands held out like proof. Ray taught a kid from the neighborhood how to change a tire and charged him $7 because he said the kid would respect the lesson more if it cost him a burger. I let him write up the invoice on pink paper and put it on the pegboard with the serious work orders like a joke that tells a truth. People stop me in the grocery store by the peonies and the breakfast cereal and say I know you. They tell me about their cousins and their sons and their mothers. They say thank you for telling the worst thing and the best that came after. I say we do not get to choose the worst. We do get to choose the next. They nod. We all keep moving down the aisle because the world does not pause to admire our lessons. If you have watched this long, you know the shape of my story. A plan. A forest. A walk. A woman who decided not to die. A boy who learned too late that money is a poor god. A man who sold fear and found a buyer with a badge. A shop that stayed open. A scarf that kept its promise. A flower out of season that bloomed because it did not care about the calendar. No miracles. Just work and witnesses. I went back to Alaska in August when blueberries stain your fingers and the light lingers like it wants to hear the end of a good story. Ava met me at the park gate with a nod that meant more than any hug and handed Lila a day pack with a whistle clipped to the strap. Lila had never flown farther than Spokane before. She stood in borrowed boots and looked at the mountains like they were a new language she already half understood. We started on the Savage River Loop because that is where people who want to learn walk. Wind moved through dwarf birch like quiet applause. The river shouldered past rocks that had not moved since the last ice thoughts. I sang softly because singing calms the part of you that thinks every shadow is a consequence. Ava walked point, eyes on sign, rifles slung easy. Lila kept checking behind us until the rhythm of her breath matched ours. We rounded a bend and found a snare line set where no snare belongs. Cable looped low in brush like a question with a cruel answer. Ava stopped without a word and let silence draw a frame around what we were seeing. She crouched and pointed once, twice. Fresh sign. Gloves. Boots with a tread pattern that did not know how to lie. A dragged mark in moss like punctuation. We heard it before we saw it. A low, strangled sound that is somewhere between a cough and a plea. Not human. Not far. Ava lifted one palm. Wait. She moved ahead slow as patience. Lila and I followed on her marks. A young caribou lay on its shoulder beyond a screen of willow, one leg trapped in a cable loop. Panic had spent itself and left a glaze in its eyes. Every muscle in its neck quivered with effort that had nowhere to go. Ava kept her voice low and steady. We are here. We will not make this worse. She handed me bear spray and put her rifle within reach without pointing it at anything alive. She showed Lila how to cut cable with a small bolt cutter she pulled from her pack like a magic trick. She had done this before. She moved like the world had taught her to be careful and she had listened. We heard boots. Two men coming down the service cut like they owned what the map said belonged to everyone. One wore a cap with a patch that meant nothing good. The other had a face like weathered stone and hands that had hit without regret. They stopped when they saw us and smiled because some men practice that expression more than they practice mercy. The older one said you girls lost and his eyes skipped from me to the cable to the caribou to Ava's rifle and he kept smiling like a man who thinks he is the only person in the room holding a card worth playing. Ava didn't raise her voice. She didn't explain. She said two names and a statute number and the phrase illegal take and the phrase wanton waste and the men's smiles did not reach their eyes now. The older one took a step like a test. I stepped toward him without thinking. My shop brain arrived before my fear did. You set this, I said, and my words were simple enough to stack in any order and still hold. You set this near a tourist loop to teach the woods your rules. You're going to learn ours. The younger man's hand twitched toward his pocket. Lila lifted her phone and started filming because I have taught her that light is a tool. The younger man froze like a deer under a porch string. The older one measured our angles and decided to try charm one more time. He said we were interfering with a lawful harvest, and Ava laughed once like a bark and said, "Tell that to the judge who already has your face on file." She named Jax without naming him. She said the court that just sentenced your boss has opened folders looking for friends. He looked at me then, a small change in focus you only see when you have learned to read men who think distance is a weapon, and he saw that the woman in front of him had walked out of a space he thought would hold her. He spat into moss with theatrical disgust, like he needed the performance to stay upright. He told the younger one to leave the line, and he told me to mind my city business, and he backed away because a rifle on a ranger's shoulder and a phone camera in a girl's hand and a woman's body standing where he intended fear to stand makes for bad math. They were not gone 5 minutes before we heard the thump of rotors. Ava had made a call without looking like she made a call. The helicopter skimmed the canyon and threw our hair into our eyes and set down where the river widened. 2 rangers in green stepped out like the state had decided to grow a spine where ours had been doing the job alone. They took statements and coordinates. They cut the remaining snares and wrote numbers on tags and tucked them into evidence bags like weeds pulled out by the roots. We freed the caribou together. Cable gives when you find the right angle. Blood returned to the leg in pulses that looked like forgiveness arriving and not quite sure where to sit. The animal stood because standing is what bodies try first. It wobbled, looked past us without seeing any of us, and moved into brush like it remembered a thing we never knew. Lila cried into her sleeve and laughed into it at the same time because relief looks like both in the first minute. On the hike out we saw officers at the service cut waiting where men who think they own shortcuts have to pass. The older one did not smile when cuffs found his wrists. He looked at me, not rage so much as calculation snapping like a cable cut wrong. I looked back. I did not owe him a flinch. The younger one tried to talk. The officer told him to save it for the room with the recorder. Lila filmed the sky because sometimes all you can hold is blue. At the lot we sat on the bumper of Ava's truck and ate sandwiches while paperwork happened around us. We did not toast anything. We did not pose. We licked mustard from our fingers and let our calves stop shaking. Ava said, "This is why we have rules and this is why we keep coming back." She looked at me and said, "You got your miles back today." I nodded because sometimes truth arrives in a single sentence and you do not dare make it bigger. That night at the lodge I slept without waking to the sound of a zipper that is not there. In the morning we walked the rest of the loop because finishing matters. On the flight home Lila pressed her forehead to the window and traced mountains with a finger. She said I did not know I could be brave while recording. I said that is exactly how women have been making history forever. Back in Seattle the city breathed in exhaust and coffee the way it always does. The shop door rolled up and the day poured in. A woman named Naomi coasted in with a minivan that made a grinding growl at low speed. Her twin boys fought over a juice box in the back and went silent when Lila knelt and asked them if they wanted to see a jack work. She lifted the van slowly while they watched wheels leave the ground. Their faces changed shape. Wonder does that. Naomi said the noise started on the way to a night shift. I told her I heard a wheel bearing failing and pointed my ear to the sound so she could hear it too. We scheduled her for the afternoon. She left a box of donut holes on the counter that Ray pretended he did not want and then ate 3 of. Late that night after we locked up I drove toward home on the Aurora corridor and saw hazard lights stutter ahead like a breathing problem. A sedan sat at an angle with the hood up and a woman stood by it waving her phone the way people do when prayer is a flashlight. 2 kids were in the back seat. Not twins. Tired. A tow truck idled behind her, not one of the reputable companies. The driver leaned on her door frame too close and spoke too fast and wrote numbers on a clipboard that had more zeros than the street required. He said, "Cash or we take the car now." He said storage fees stack like bricks. I pulled in behind him and put my hazards on and got out and said hello like a neighbor. He didn't bother to hide his annoyance. He said the lady had an agreement. The lady looked at me with eyes that had been small all day, and I made mine big enough to fit her. I asked if she had signed. She hadn't. I asked if he had a rotation call number from the city. He did not. I told him the state patrol will be here in 5 minutes because that is what happens when a stranger tries to write a payday into someone else's night without a right to be there. I said it calm. He got loud. Men like that hate calm. He stepped closer. I stepped closer. He smelled like a bar that got mopped with beer. He said, "This is none of your business." I said, "Everything about the safety of women on the side of the road is my business." I told the woman to get back in her car and lock the doors and call 911 and tell the operator she was being pressured into a predatory tow. I put my back against her door like a rampart built from a person who has already decided to stand. He puffed his chest. He looked at the kids. He made a calculation and got back in his truck and left because cameras live in 1,000 windows on Aurora and women tell stories to each other and men who make a living off lies do not like lights. I followed him with my eyes until the red taillights turned into bland city glow. Then I popped the woman's hood and checked what I already knew. Battery terminal corroded. Alternator belt glazed. A fix you can limp with for 6 blocks. I cleaned the terminal with the little brush I keep in my glove box because I am an optimist disguised as a cynic. The engine turned over like a sigh that had been waiting. I drove behind her to her apartment, then drove home behind my own heartbeat finally slowing down. The next morning Naomi brought the minivan back and we replaced her wheel bearing before lunch. She left with brakes that did not sing and a laugh that did. The woman from Aurora came by at noon with a bag of oranges for the counter and a thank you card written in shaky block letters by a kid who drew my truck as a rectangle with wheels too big. I tacked it to the cork board where I keep the kind of things people think are small and I know are not. The DA called about the men from the snare line. The one with the stone face had a record that threaded through 3 states. He would add time to a calendar that needed it. The younger one wanted to talk. He offered names tied to Jack's in exchange for fewer years. The prosecutor said the web was wider than the first threads we saw. Ava texted that she had testified again and that the map behind her was starting to look like a story with an ending. Ray asked if we were going to install a gate across the alley. I told him we were going to install a community instead. We put up a chalkboard by the coffee pot and wrote 2 words at the top. Need and have. By the end of the week it had a dozen chalk lines. A woman needed a ride to chemo. A man had time on Tuesdays. A high school kid needed a pair of steel-toe boots. Lila had a pair she'd outgrown. Ray needed a recipe for ribs. 3 customers had opinions. People came for oil changes and left with names. That weekend I stood in my kitchen with the window open to the smell of wet cedar and made a pie no recipe handed down because sometimes you just want to see if you can make sweetness out of what you have left. I baked it too long. The crust went dark around the edges like a warning not to confuse action with rush. I cut a piece anyway and ate it standing up and decided dark can taste like depth. Tyler called during the dusk when the house makes sounds like it is settling around you. He said the program had assigned him to a shop in the prison yard. He said he rebuilt a lawn mower engine without help for the first time in his life. He wanted to tell me how a carburetor works as if I had not explained that to him when he was 16 and bored and pretending not to listen. I did not say any of that. I let him talk. When he paused I told him about the tow truck at Aurora and about the snare and the caribou and the fairy horn. He said he could see it. He said he wished. I let silence sit between us until it felt exact. When we hung up I took Paul's scarf from the chair and wrapped it around my shoulders and stood by the window and watched headlights chalk the street. People moved through their own nights, carrying sorrows and sandwiches and socket sets. The city does not know our names. It holds us anyway. The prison's restorative justice program invited me to a circle on a Wednesday shaped like rain. I hesitated because I am not a saint and I do not owe anyone the performance of it. The letter said the circle was not about forgiveness. It was about speaking a truth out loud in front of witnesses and letting facts be heard without excuse. Facts have been my friends lately. I said yes. We sat in a room with chairs in an actual circle, no tables to hide behind. A facilitator with eyes that saw every flinch rang a small bell and the sound went to corners that had not been paying attention. Tyler sat across from me, his posture tight the way a bolt feels right before you back it off a quarter turn so you don't break it. 2 men from the program sat beside him. One woman who had lost a brother in a fight that should have been an argument sat beside me because she knows how to hold a space when words make it wobble. We went around once with names and what we hoped not to do today. I said I hoped not to make my story pretty. Tyler said he hoped not to lie to himself. The bell rang again. The facilitator said let's go where it hurts without setting the whole room on fire. I told it simple. You brought me to a place where death was more likely than not and called it a plan. You smiled. You shut a zipper on my tent with a hand I once taught to hold a spoon. You left. I walked. I am here. I will not carry your shame like it is my inheritance. Tyler did not interrupt. He did not cry. When it was his turn he told a story I already knew the outline of and hated hearing filled in. He said Jax had offered him a way out of a debt he did not know how to name. He said he liked how easy it felt to tell himself a story where the wild would do the thing he did not have the stomach to do. He said he did not understand his mother's body would be in that space when the story played. He said that last line in a voice that made a guard look up. I believed him in the way you believe a weather report. Useful. Not controlling your day. When it was the woman's turn she said a sentence that stayed. No one who loves you will ask you to give up the person you are to keep them. She looked at Tyler when she said it. She looked at me too. Truth will look directly at anyone it can catch. We closed with a breath you could hear. The bell rang and my hands felt like they belonged to my arms again. Tyler asked if he could hug me. I said no. He nodded like that was a logical answer and stood without trying to make it not be true. As I walked out he said Mom wait in a voice I did not recognize. I turned. He said I am going to be a man who can say no to himself out loud. That is what I owe you. I nodded because vows need air. Outside the prison the air tasted like almost autumn. A woman from the circle walked with me to the lot. She asked what I would do now. I said the same thing I do every day. Work. Sleep. Feed the scholarship. Teach the girl in my shop why listening to a belt can save your life. She laughed and said that sounded like faith with other words. At the shop the next morning a guy came in with a lifted truck and a chip on his shoulder and said he wanted to speak to the man in charge. Lila looked at him the way a mirror looks and said you are. He blinked and recovered and tried again. I stepped out of the office and said she is in charge of your breaks today and my hands are busy. He laughed and then he did not when he realized no one was moving to soften him. We fixed his truck. He left with brakes that would stop him short of the kind of mistakes he was used to making. He did not say thanks. He will next time or he will go somewhere else. I will be fine either way. Mateo stopped by with a certificate and a smile that made the office feel like a bigger room. He brought his mother who spoke to me in Spanish faster than my high school memory could carry. I caught gracias and manos and futuro and understood enough to nod with my whole face. I told Mateo the scholarship pays forward. He said he was already teaching his cousin how to change oil. He said he was going to buy his mother a set of wipers before the rain started and I said that is the sexiest sentence I have heard all year and Lila snorted coffee through her nose. That night I drove to the waterfront and sat where I had watched them take Jax away. The ferries moved like they always do, into and out of the city's chest. I took Paul's scarf out of my bag and laid it across my lap and told him out loud about the circle and the truck and the boy with the certificate. I told him I had not forgiven the thing that does not deserve it. I told him I had allowed room for the part of our son that might someday meet the word repair and not flinch. The water gave me back a version of my voice that did not tremble. On the way home I passed a florist and bought peonies that looked like a dare. Out of season again. I put them in a jar on my kitchen table and let them bloom anyway because permission is a door you can build yourself if no one else remembers how. I went back to Denali one more time before the snow. Ava had 2 days off in a row and a look on her face that meant the woods had asked for us. We took the same loop and then stepped past the part tourists stop at because facing the curve where fear used to live felt like turning a wrench until it clicks. We walked until boots and breath found the old pace. We stopped where the service cut meets the river and watched fog lift like a veil on a morning that did not need drama to be beautiful. We did not find snares. We found footprints of something large that belonged there and scat that said summer had fed well. We sang anyway. We sat on a flat rock and poured coffee from a thermos and ate sandwiches with mustard that found the corners of our mouths. We said almost nothing because sometimes silence is not an absence but a tool you place carefully where noise used to live. On the way back we encountered a couple from Ohio stopped in the trail with eyes too big. A bear ambled 50 yards off, more interested in berries than their personal doom. They had a phone out and fear held like a selfie stick. Ava raised one hand and guided them without touching, speaking calm so their bodies could hear it. We clapped and talked and backed away and the bear lifted its head once at the sound of our unremarkable humanity and then went back to its breakfast. The couple breathed again. The woman started to cry. I told her crying is a feature, not a bug. She laughed and wiped her nose on a sleeve that had not been meant for that. They thanked us a dozen times and then some. We told them they had saved themselves by listening. At the lodge that night a bus group watched a video loop about safety while forks clicked on plates. I looked at the screen and saw words like make noise and carry spray and respect distance and thought yes and also learn what people can do to each other and carry the kind of spray that takes the form of witnesses and plans. I fell asleep to wind under the eaves and woke with a feeling I could not name yet. Back in Seattle I found the shop door chalkboard filled with lines between need and have. Boots had found feet. Rides had found bodies. A recipe had found a grill. Ray had added a line of his own at the bottom. We need a day off and we have 2 hands each. I gave him Friday. A letter came from Tyler 3 weeks later and I almost put it in the shredder because muscle memory is a stern teacher. I opened it instead. He wrote 4 pages without asking for money or a will or a miracle. He wrote about a small engine he fixed for the prison yard's mower and how it felt to hear it run without coughing. He wrote about the circle and how the sentence about love and loss kept showing up when he tried to lie to himself. He wrote about a list he keeps in his pocket with 4 lines that make sense. Do the work. Tell the truth. Ask for nothing I have not earned. Learn a name for the thing in me that wants the shortcut and speak to it like a child who needs a firm hand. At the bottom he wrote one more thing. If you never visit again I will understand. If you do I will not make you regret it. I put the letter in the drawer with the lighter and closed it. I did not visit that month. I fixed cars and wrote scholarship notes and ate dinner over the sink like a stereotype and did not apologize for it. I took a Sunday and drove up to Mount Rainier and stood where Paul had taught Tyler to follow tracks and let the memory come and go like weather. I told the part of me that still holds the image of a truck disappearing down a dirt road that it could put its bags down. It did. The shop hit its busy season as the rains returned. Lila rebuilt her first caliper without looking up and then looked up and hooped because competence is intoxicating. Mateo stopped by with his cousin, who asked for an oil change and left with a job lead at a body shop down the block because Ray ran his mouth in the right direction. A customer brought peonies grown under lights in a greenhouse in Kent that smelled like spring in defiance of October, and we put them in a jar that once held bolts because we refused to let one purpose define us. On a Friday night I took the scarf and walked to the waterfront. The ferry side and took on cars. A street musician played a song Paul liked and got the chords not quite right, and I loved it more than I would have if he had nailed it. I thought about the people who had watched my story on a screen and typed words at the bottom and felt a part of it because they were. Stories do not live until someone hears them and decides to carry a piece. This is where I ask you for something and I will ask it plain the way I have learned to do everything that matters. If the work I did to live through what my son planned made your breath catch and then even out, tell me in the comments where you're listening from so I know how far this traveled. If you care about kids who learn with their hands, share this with someone who has grease under their nails or wants to. If you think the wild should be kept for mornings and not for murder, Click the subscribe so we can keep making noise together when someone tries to sell silence as a shortcut. If you are carrying a secret shame someone handed you with a smile, put it down tonight and go to bed with your door locked and your heart unlocked. And when this ends, do not stop. Click the next story on the left and stay with me. I have more miles to walk. I have more engines to set right. I have a scarf that still keeps its promise. I stood there until the ferry horn drew a line again and watched it carry strangers who are not really strangers because all of us are walking around with radios in our chests tuned to survive and repair. Then I went home and slept through the night like a woman who met the grizzly the world sent and decided it did not get the last word. If this story moved you, tap like so numbers tell the algorithm you want more endings like this. Hit subscribe and the bell so you do not miss the next chapter. Share this with one person who needs to hear that they can change their will and their mind and their life. Tell me in the comments what city you're in and whether you've ever fixed something with your own hands. Then click the next story. We are not done. We are just getting louder.